Hello, welcome to the second in our series of teaching skills videos for EFL teachers. Thank you for your comments on the last video, and the topic of today's video is error correction, which, unlike monitoring, there is a lot of information on the internet, and this is what we're going to look at today. The first question I suppose that everyone wants to know is, should we correct or should we not correct during speaking activities? So let's look at why we shouldn't correct. And I think there are 4 reasons not to correct a student when they're doing a speaking activity. The first depends on the purpose of the activity. For example, if the purpose of your speaking activity is fluency, what you don't want to be doing is constantly interrupting your student. Obviously their aim is to build up confidence, getting the words out, and if you're constantly getting in and stopping them, they're not going to build up the fluency required. Also, if the idea of the activity is to use certain structures, for example suggestion or recommendation, or to use certain vocabulary that the students have just learnt, and that's the objective of the activity. If you're coming in and correcting other things like the third person S or the use of the past, again, that's not really the objective of the activity. So one reason not to correct students would be because you just need to let them do what they're trying to do, whether it's fluency or focus on a particular language. The second reason not to correct a student would be depending on the type of error they're making. For example, if they're making what we call a slip, which is just a silly little mistake, which I'm probably making in this video, just little things where you're a little bit nervous and the wrong word comes out, it's not really a mistake, and so therefore you wouldn't want to be pouncing on those type of errors. The second type of error are those which we call systematic errors, or errors as they're called, which are basically things that students haven't learned yet. For example, when the student says, yesterday I goed, and they haven't even learned the past tense, or if they say yesterday I go, we can understand the meaning, but it's not really a mistake because they haven't learned this language yet, so they're just working with what they know. So that would be another reason not to correct a student when they're maybe being ambitious with the language for the sake of communication. The third type of mistake would be what we would call a non-systematic error, or sometimes called a mistake, and this is maybe where we would like to correct our students, so we'll look at that a bit later. A third reason not to correct the students would be the effect that it might have on your student. You might have students in your class who are maybe shy, or maybe they find it very difficult to speak, or they've been speaking their own language all day and suddenly they're in a speaking activity and they're required to speak English, and it's quite difficult. And then for the teacher to come over and be constantly correcting them can actually knock their confidence. So think about your students and think about their personalities, and think about what your objective is. If you really want to build up confidence, you might want to just let them go a little bit and let a few of those errors go and not be corrected, just so the students can get a bit more confident. And finally, the student might actually not want to be corrected. So if the student says, no, I don't want you to correct me, then I think you should respect that and not correct them. So that would be another example. So if those are the situations when you shouldn't correct a student, when should you? Well, it would be the other reasons. If the student wants to be corrected, if they say, yes, please correct me. I know when I'm learning Spanish, I want the teacher to correct me all the time. I want to know all my mistakes. I get very annoyed if I don't find out my mistakes, because I'm worried that I'll be repeating them. But not all students are like that. But if a student wants correction, then you should try and give it to them. And the second reason is, like I mentioned before, the type of mistake. If it's a non-systematic mistake, or a mistake as they call it, then you should try and correct it, because these are the important things. If it's the language that they're grappling with, it's the language they've learned but they've forgotten, if it's the language that you're teaching, these are the type of things that need a little bit more processing and they need to be reminded of. So going back to the choice of the student, when if you say, the student might want correction or not want correction, well, how would you know? You've got a lot of students in your class, so how do you know who wants correction? Well, you can ask them, but that's a lot of memorizing to do, who wants what. So a simple way is maybe to start with a simple, like a card system like this, where you've got like 3 colours, like green for go, red for stop, and orange for something in the middle. And you can give one of these to each student, and they can literally tell you through the use of colours what they want. If they just have the green on the desk, that means they want to go, they want to speak, they don't want to be interrupted. They're concentrating on fluency. If the student has the red on the desk, that means stop me all the time, stop every single mistake I make, because I want to know, a bit like me in my Spanish class. And the orange would be something in between. Maybe that would be the student says, no, don't stop me on every error, just stop me on those important errors, those non-systematic errors, or those mistakes as they're called, the ones that are important. So depending on your students' wishes, well, you can obviously then focus on certain students in the class. Okay, so let's say we've decided that we are going to correct the students. Then the question is, like, how are we going to do it? And I think you've got to be thinking about 3 things. One is your physical position in the room. Secondly is like, who are you going to focus on and for how long? And thirdly is which method of error correction you're going to use. Now the question of positioning is very much like the previous video, which I hope you saw on monitoring. If you didn't, you can watch it after this one. And that is about getting close to your students. You've got to get close enough to listen to them, but not to be intimidating. So maybe get a chair or be behind your students, have a notebook and pen, and but don't necessarily be like staring at them. Maybe look in a different direction, but have your ears towards one group. The second thing is you haven't really got time to listen to everybody in one speaking activity. If you've got 15 students, spending like 10 or 15 seconds listening to every student is not really going to be very useful. So it's much better for you just to pick maybe 2 or 3 students and just listen to them for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then maybe move to one other group, and that's it. And then in another speaking activity you can focus on different students. It's better to get a bigger sample, because then your feedback or your correction will be much more valuable. And thirdly, well, you've got to decide the method that you use. And the method that you use will vary from the most direct, where you're coming straight in and correcting directly, to the most indirect, which would just be not correcting directly, but taking notes. So that's what we're going to look at now. Okay, so direct correction is where you literally correct the mistake. You hear the mistake, the student says something like, yesterday I go. You say, no, I went. I hear this a lot. Teachers like direct correction. I guess they like it because it's quick, and then the activity then moves on. But it's not my favourite, and I think the reason why is because I don't think there's much processing going on in the student's head. They hear the mistake, they make the mistake, they hear the correction, and then they repeat the correct version. But do they really remember it? That's always my worry, and I think because it is so quick, often students don't remember. So if you are going to use this method, at least tell the students to write the word down, or you write the word down so that you can then recycle it later. The middle ground is to give your students a chance to correct, and there's again 3 ways of doing this. The first way is literally you signal that there's been a mistake, like with your face, like there was a mistake there, and then the students have to work out. They see your reaction was bad, and they're thinking, oh, there was a mistake. You might signal like try again, or tell them to try again, and then they've got to work out where the mistake was. That's the disadvantage of this method, is sometimes they don't know in a longer sentence where the mistake was. So you've got two other techniques to use. One is to isolate the grammatical area. Let's say it's the past. You could say something like past tense, or yesterday, past. And they go, I went. So by isolating the area, they know where to focus. Or you could focus on the word itself. I go, and they know it's the word go is wrong, so then they might try and correct that. There's only 2 things that can happen when you use this technique. Is either the student knows how to correct the mistake, which they self-correct, which is great. You can give them some praise and tell them to write it down so they've got a record of it. The other thing that might happen is that they don't know how to correct it. They simply don't know the answer, in which case you can either give them the answer and tell them to write it down, or maybe you can elicit the answer from another student. You've got other students around involved in the discussion. Maybe they can help, and that's nice for them because it's good for their egos to help a little bit, and it's nice that everyone is processing. Some of them are thinking, they're all thinking of the answer, or they're trying to think of the answer. So that's good for processing time. And again, get everyone to write everything down. And the last method of correction, which is not correcting, is simply listening and writing down the mistakes. And in this case, you've really got to decide what you're going to do with all these mistakes. If you're just literally writing them down in a list, you have got to decide which are the important ones. Which of those are slips, which of them are errors, and which of them are those mistakes, the ones that are important that you can focus on, or the ones that are relevant to the task. Another method that you could use, which some of my students quite like, is that I have little slips of paper, and as I'm going around, I write the name of the student on the top of the paper, the name of the student, and if they make a mistake, I will just write out the sentence with the mistake in it, and I'll just keep flipping the pieces of paper over with each student's names. Each time they make a mistake, I'll just add it to their list, and then at the end of the class, with no pressure, I'll give them the slips of paper and tell them to try and correct their mistakes. If they can't, they can go home and try and correct them. And I think this is great because it gives the students a lot of chance to self-correct. It gives them a little bit of time to do it. They can obviously ask their partner for a bit of help as well. There's a lot more processing involved, and the students have a record once the mistake's been corrected. So that's a nice little way of correcting, which involves more personalised way. So that's adding some value for the student. So one final word on error correction. It might be that when you're going around listening to your students, you might find that some of them aren't making any mistakes at all, and you might think, "Oh, that's fantastic, no errors." But it also might be that your students are just simply not taking any risks at all with their language. They're just simply using the same phrases over and over again because they're afraid of making mistakes. So it's very important that you encourage your students to try to use new vocabulary and new structures and not worry about making mistakes. That making mistakes is part of the learning process and is a positive thing. At the same time, as you're listening and noting down errors, you should also be noting down good things that your students are producing. It's really nice at the end of an activity to praise your students and put a big list of nice phrases that you've heard during an activity, and then to repeat the activity. So not only the students get a chance to incorporate some new language that they've got from other students, but also they get a chance to not repeat the same mistakes they've made before. So that's about it on error correction. Thanks for watching. I'd be very interested to know how you do error correction, if you do anything different or if you have any interesting techniques that you use. So please add those to the comments below. If you like the video, you can like it. And if you want to know when we put up more videos, you can subscribe to the channel pressing the subscribe button, and we'll let you know when there's new things online. I think the next video is going to be on lesson planning. So until then, have a good class. Bye.